Okay guys, so we've got some new fresh line on this rod. This is the tip of the rod, of course. Here we're just gonna take and get your main line. This is 30-pound Power Pro. This is what we're using here for the main line. And the reason I'm not worried about running a bumper on this, I don't lose my main line because I use a detachable weight. If this gets stuck in the rocks or anything, it pops open and the whole thing comes back. So these rods don't have a big enough tip on them to run a thick bumper, and I don't like the casting 20-pound or 15-pound test out of the rod. It's not as smooth. So we're going to go ahead and run our 30-pound braid to our 15 or 12-pound leader. So let's get started. We've got our main 30-pound braid here, and you've got some bumper stops. I like to use these rubber ones. They're from BOMAC. BOMAC bobber stop, and they are really strong. They don't slide. I have used these in the past quite a bit, and unfortunately with these you got to really tighten them down and sometimes use a couple of them in order to get them to work. Depending on what you're using, it works okay on mono, but they just don't work that great with braid, I've found. So I've switched over to these BOMAC setups, and you got to pay attention. They do have different sizes. For instance, these are for 12-pound to 20-pound test, and it's important to understand that it's going to make a huge difference. You want to make sure you got the right ones. So that we're going to go over what hooks we want to use for our leaders and why we change these different size hooks. And we also have the egg weights, and your bobber has a weight. So the first thing you're going to want to do is take one of these bobber stops so that this bobber doesn't, you can adjust it. It's an adjustable rubber bobber stop. You get this through here just like that, and what you're going to do is, I usually make a nice long 4 or 5 inch tag end just like this here. So you can go like that, and you're going to take the bead and the bobber stop and pull them both down over the top of both of these lines until the other line comes out, and that's going to leave this bobber and bobber stop on your main line. So watch how I do this. I'm going to try and do it so you can see it. I'm going to hold this and pull. I'm pulling with this hand and I'm holding tight with this. You can see both the lines going through there, and then when that tag end comes out just like that, it leaves this great little bobber stop on here that you can adjust for different depths, and that bead will stop that bobber from going on there. So now let's go ahead and take our bobber, and we're going to go ahead and slide it through the tip of the hole. I'm sorry, we're going to take our bobber, and this is a 3/4 ounce bobber, and I'm going to explain that to you in a moment. So see how this stops right here? Just stops it right at that bobber stop. Okay, so we're going to slide this down there. Now this part's important. If it does break off, you don't want to lose your bobber setup, so we're going to take another one of these. So you have to burn one of these or get your own beads, and you're going to take this bead and put the bead on next, and make sure it fits in the bottom of the bobber so it doesn't go inside that hole. Okay, and this one is good. It does stop right there. Okay, perfect. So now what you're going to do is take another rubber bumper stop, I guess I call them. It's a bumper that bobber goes against. Bring that tag end down about 4 inches. This time, take that rubber stop and leave the bead in your fingers. Don't put the bead on this time. You don't need it. Okay, pull that through. And now, if you break off at your weight, which you usually won't, and I'll show you why, you still get your entire setup back if it breaks off at this spot right here. Okay. And that part's really important, so you're not losing all your bobber setup gear, and it's quicker to retie another setup. So now that we've got our bobber stops here, what I'm going to go ahead and do is put my new weight on. I say new because this is a new thing here, you guys. People in the past have showed me, oh, you use this inline weight, and what they do is they take this inline weight here and they tie it directly to their main line, just like this, and then they tie their leader right to that weight. Now here's the problem, guys. I don't know how this got started. It's the same as the cannonballs. The cannonballs get snagged so bad, it's unbelievable that we even use them. This goes under a rock, it's going to take your whole setup. This bobber stop might not even help if it gets under, this whole thing gets under a rock, because it's tied completely to your main line and your leader. And the weight is what's going to get snagged on the bottom most of the time, because it's floating down the lowest. The baits are usually floating up a little bit higher. So this I couldn't get over, and so I added my new setup that I use for my drift fishing. And there's why I use the slider weight. The swivel just breaks off and get it back. We're going to throw our slider weight on first, which can actually go over this bumper. So depending on where we have that bumper, which is usually going to be down by your swivel. Okay, so now we've got a slider weight on here. Okay guys, so the slider weight is going to allow the fish to not feel the other weight when it goes to pick it up, and it's only going to move the bobber instead of move the weight and then move the bobber. So here we want to make sure your swivel and your weight are the same, matching somewhat to the same size to where they're not wanting to slide out. And this part's easy. We're just going to do a blood knot. And we're going to go through the eye of just a regular barrel swivel, just like this. And you're going to have the two ends. This is your tag end and this is your main line. You're going to just go over the top of it, just like when you join two lines together. Go right over those two lines and go through there 5 times back through this hole. 1, I pull a little slack out of it, and go 2, pull a little slack out again, 3, pull a little slack out, 4, right there, and 5, and then you should be able to just pull it tight like this. Comes right there together, and then just slide it down like that, and it tightens it up. Make sure that is nice and snug, and then we're just going to trim that off. Just leave a little bit of a tag on there. Okay, so here's what we got, you guys. I've got my bumper to keep my weight from falling off, and I bring that all the way down pretty much by my swivel here. So if it breaks off, my bobber stays there. And here's your setup right here, and you're just going to tie your leader right to this barrel swivel, and you can adjust this depth by just simply adjusting this bead right here. So right now that's only set at, you know, about 3 or 4 feet. We can bring this bobber stop all the way down to here and have this whole setup only at the depth of what your leader is. Okay, so this is how I'm going to run it on the main line, and what will happen is if this weight gets stuck in the bottom, instead of being connected to the main line here 100%, this swivel, it's important to get the kind that do not interlock. This swivel will bend way before the 30-pound main line breaks. It will leave this weight on the bottom. It will come back bent like this. No weight. You pop another weight back on, bend it back, and you're back to fishing. You don't lose your whole setup, and this doesn't get snagged as much as the cannonballs, or it doesn't have a line tied to both ends of it, so it's not going to get snagged as much as that other setup. I understand most people don't have their bobbers on the bottom, but whenever you try a new spot, potentially your bobber is going to be on the bottom. I see them floating down the river all the time, so you can't say they don't get snagged. and that's why the whole thing's going to break off. So this is my new setup for my bobber fishing. I don't use these inline weights anymore, just like I don't use those round cannonballs. They're destructive. So your leader, you got a couple ways you can do this. We can run split shots down that leader, and the density of the split shot holds it back, and if you check your bobber up just a little bit, it keeps this floating out in front of it, just like this, so that your hook is in front, and they see that before they see any of this leader weight. It'll kind of bend like that up to your bobber. Okay, the other way that you can do this is some people will use an egg weight, which is one of these little guys right here. These are Bomac egg weights that I use, and it's just a little weight on there on your hook, and I go ahead and do it just like I do my cheaters, so it's right there in the clump of eggs, hidden and concealed, and it's weighted, so it holds that down there for you, and you know, kind of keeps it to where they, you know, to me it still might see that line first. I like using the lead, because the lead weight right here, a small split shot and bigger makes it actually bow towards the fish and presents that bait first instead of second. So either way, you're going to tie this or a jig or whatever you want right to your main line. I suggest 12 pound, 10 pound. If you're new, go with 15 pounds so you're not losing fish. Nobody wants to lose their first fish. Now this part's pretty important, the different size hooks that we're going to use. You see I've got number 4 here. I'll use that for if I'm side drifting in a boat or just casting and I want to use a smaller amount of weight, or egg clumps. I'll use a number 4 on my regular drift setup. I'll go to a number 2 if I am going with a bigger clump, because there's lots of little fish that are pegging at it, and that will happen sometimes. You have to use more eggs than a small clump if you have lots of little fish, bottom feeders and stuff like that, or jacks. Now for my bobber setup right here, I like to run a number 1 SSW. It's a pretty sharp needle point hook, and it gets into those fish pretty good. If there's a lot of jacks in the water, I will switch over to a number 1 hook, and that kind of keeps those jacks from getting hooked quite as often. The reason I've got number 2, 2/0 here, is we'll take a 2/0 and we'll throw our clump of eggs on there, especially for steelhead, and then we'll throw a coon shrimp on there or a sand shrimp. I like getting live sand shrimp. I know how to catch them and I know where to get the big ones, so I typically will just throw a sand shrimp on the bottom of that clump of eggs, and you need a bigger hook to do so. So that's why we have such an array of different size hooks. Some of them are for casting eggs all the way across the river. You're going to need small hard clumps for the number 4. If you're just pitching them and they're nice decent clumps, you can just use that number 1 hook. Or a number 2, and then you start getting into the bobbers and you want to use the number 1 or number 2, or even a 1/0, depending on what you're doing. And you can see how I have all these pre-tied with different sets. Some of them have the cheater weights on them, and some of them are set up to just run some split shot. So it's important to keep the buoyancy right about in here, so when they yank down, this yanks back like that, and it sets the hook, and then you pull. As soon as it goes down, yank and pull and set the hook, and the bobber's in the middle of helping you do that. So it's very important. When you see that bobber go down, that bobber is setting the hook already, and then you're yanking and setting the hook harder. And when our weight's on here, we're going to be set up to catch some fish. Have a look. Okay, this is an egg sack. Go ahead and bobber up, man. You know how to use, have you fished with bobber before? Really effective. Is the fish. If they see us move, they scoop. Now walk backwards. Go ahead and walk backwards. She got her fish. That one looks like it might be bigger. Told you to catch the biggest one first, right? Said be patient, you'll catch the biggest one first, and you did. That one might be 20. Nice coho. First fish of the day.